I'm going to read a bit of wish now from the beginning. 55 years ago. That year there was no party and no cake because no one felt like celebrating, but Rosanna still lined up her cards on the mantelpiece so that it felt a bit like a birthday. There was one from her grandmother with a picture of a girl stroking a kitten, and one from her aunt and uncle with a picture of a girl stroking a puppy, and one from her other aunt and uncle with a picture of a girl not stroking anything, but just standing in a flowery meadow, smiling and holding a daisy chain. Although the cards were very nice, Rosanna would secretly have preferred a picture of a girl steering a red sail boat across a tropical sea towards a mystery island, like the illustration on the front of the adventure storybook that she'd been given as her best present. Her favourite card was the one from her mum and dad, and she put it in the middle of the mantelpiece. On the front were the words, "You are 10. They were illustrated as if they were bursting fireworks, lighting up a dark sky dusted with stars. Inside was a verse. 10 candles on your birthday cake. Each one's a wish for you to make. Adventures all, they wait for you to come and make those dreams come true." But there'd be no wishes this year. She put the birthday candles in a little box and placed them in a drawer. Maybe next year, she thought. After all, she had plans. Lots of plans. Now, chapter 1. "Miss Filey's house," repeated Ed, outraged. "We have to spend every day this week at Miss Filey's house. Are you totally serious?" "Sorry, but it can't be helped," said his dad, avoiding Ed's gaze and sidling out of the door. "It can't be helped," echoed Ed's mother loudly from the other room where she was packing DVDs into a box. "It's no good moaning, Ed." "I'm not moaning. I hardly said anything. But can we not discuss it? Don't I have a say?" "Not in this case," called his mother. "Sorry, you'll just have to grin and bear it. There is literally no alternative, and if Miss Filey hadn't made the suggestion, I don't know what we'd have done." "But I'd rather spend next week in the shed. I'd rather spend it in the middle of a car park, in the rain. I bet she doesn't even have Wi-Fi." "Who are you talking about?" asked his 9-year-old sister, Rue. She had an irritating habit of quietly entering rooms and then speaking before you even realised she was standing next to you. Ed swiveled to face her. "Sit down, Rue. I've got bad news." Her pointed face seemed to sharpen. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Yes, fine," he said dismissively. "It's not that sort of bad news. It's about the half-term holiday club. It's been cancelled." "Why?" "The toilet at the hall overflowed, and the building's been declared a biohazard, and they're having to get specialist cleaners in, and so—" "Why did it overflow?" "No idea." It was another of Rue's irritating habits, to interrupt good stories with unimportant questions. "So anyway, the club's not on, and for some reason we can't stay in the house when Mum and Dad are at work." "You know exactly why you can't," called their mother, whose hearing was bat-like. "The whole back of the house is being torn off for the new extension, so there'll be workmen everywhere and cables, and they don't need children wandering around." "I don't wander," said Ed. "And anyway, you're both too young to stay on your own. Don't argue, Ed, or I shall go mad." "So what are we going to do?" asked Rue. "Can we go to our cousins?" she added hopefully. "They're away," called their mum. "This is where the bad news comes in," said Ed. "Dad has done something completely random. He bumped into Miss Filey at the recycling bins this morning, and she suggested that we go to her house during the day for an entire week." "Don't exaggerate," called Mum. "You don't have to go at the weekend, so it's literally 5 days." "Miss Filey?" asked Rue. "Yes, unbelievable, isn't it?" "I've never been inside her house," said Rue. "Nor me. Why would anyone want to?" "Well, might be interesting." Rue said the last words quietly. She never enjoyed contradicting Ed, who was a year and a half older than her, because Ed enjoyed arguing and was good at it, and she didn't and wasn't. But Miss Filey's house, at the bottom of the road, was intriguing. All the other houses were small and quite new, but hers was large and quite old, a broad brick bungalow with a wide square garden filled with flowering bushes and surrounded by trees. The front door was set in a deep porch, and above it was a window shaped like a fan. Reflections danced across it when you walked past. "But even if it's interesting, it'll still contain Miss Filey," said Ed. He leaned forward from the waist and opened his mouth wide, pitching his voice to an enthusiastic shriek. Super weather, isn't it? Are you doing an impression of Miss Filey? Called Mum. Yes, but it's not unkind, just accurate. Have a simply super day, he added. And it was true, thought Rue. That was exactly how Miss Filey talked, like somebody out of a black and white film. And she never stopped to have a conversation, just trilled a comment as she hurried by, as if calling from a passing ship. She's always very kind, shouted their mum. Remember, she came to the fundraiser and bought everything on the plant stall and all the smashed biscuits in that tin that got dropped. But what will we do there? Asked Ed, who didn't like talking about the fundraiser. I mean, seriously, Mum, what will we do at Miss Filey's house? Talk about the weather for 5 days? Eat broken biscuits? He waited for an answer, but there was no response from the next room. It might be okay, said Rue. It won't. It'll be mind-numbingly boring. But Ed was wrong, because what happened at Miss Filey's house wasn't boring. What happened at Miss Filey's house was beyond imagination. Chapter 2. The front door opened the second that Rue put her finger on the bell, and she stepped back in shock and banged her heel on the footplate of Ed's wheelchair. Crikey, you're punctual, said Miss Filey, who must have been waiting directly behind the door. Come on in. Hi, said Rue, standing on one leg and rubbing the other. Thank you for having us. We've bought packed lunches because there's loads of stuff Ed won't eat. Allergies, said Ed, who didn't have any allergies, but who was incredibly picky. I don't need help, he added quickly as Miss Filey reached out for the wheelchair handles. I can do it myself. There was only a shallow step, and he rolled across the doormat and onto the patterned wooden floor of the large square hall. His first impression was that it was full of people, and then he realised that he was looking at a wide gilt-edged mirror that filled half of the opposite wall. His own face was only visible from the chin upwards, with the top half of Rue in a red sweatshirt just beside him, her dark, straight hair swinging as she looked around the hall, and then towering over both of them, their hostess. Miss Filey was slender and quite tall, but she stooped slightly, as if she felt awkward about her height. Her grey shoulder-length hair was pulled back on one side with a tortoiseshell clip, and she was wearing, as always, a knitted jumper and a plain knee-length skirt, so that she looked a bit like an elderly schoolgirl. I'm really jolly pleased you could come, she announced. Thanks, said Rue, still looking round. Everything looked old. Not old as in, your antique table is worth £3,000, but old as in a TV series about men who smoked pipes and listened to the radio while their wives mended socks. There was an uncomfortable-looking chair beneath the mirror with a little table beside it for the telephone. There was a framed painting of a wonky cottage with roses climbing up the wall. In one corner, there was a tall wicker basket containing an umbrella, and in the other, a revolting stuffed tabby cat, its fur in matted clumps. That's Atlee, said Miss Filey. The stuffed cat opened its eyes, and Rue screamed rather loudly. Sorry, she said. He's quite harmless, said Miss Filey, and my father always said he was very intelligent and could understand every word we say. Atlee flicked them a slitted look and then yawned. The terrible stench of cat food and rotten teeth drifted across the hall. Ed covered his nose. He's frightfully old, nearly 22, said Miss Filey. Oh, said Rue, trying to sound impressed. There was a pause. Instead of telling them what to do in the traditional way of grown-ups, Miss Filey remained standing in the centre of the hall, her hands clasped. Can we look round? Asked Rue, after a minute had passed. Gosh, what a terrific idea, said Miss Filey. She sounded rather relieved. Rue had the feeling that if the suggestion hadn't been made, they'd have spent the entire day standing in the hall. Despite having no upstairs to it, Miss Filey's house felt at least twice the size of Ed and Rue's. All the rooms were large and square and light, and were linked by a broad corridor. Despite this, Rue found something dispiriting about it. It was all very clean and tidy, but despite being full of furniture and ornaments, it somehow felt empty. So this was my bedroom when I was a child, said Miss Filey, opening yet another door. And now it's my little library. The room was quite different to all the others. The only furniture was a chair and a desk with a globe on it. Floor-to-ceiling shelves on 3 walls held rows of large books and yellow-spined magazines, while on the 4th wall, next to the window, was a vast map of the world. Miss Filey paused to look at it. I try to learn the name of a new place every week, she said. running a finger down the coast of Finland and then dabbing at a tiny island. This week it's Kielandrasari, which is really jolly hard to say. Could I ask you something? Said Ed. Do you have Wi-Fi? Miss Filey looked thoughtful. Wi-Fi, she repeated, rather carefully, as if the words were in another language. Now, is that a special sort of biscuit? Ed, who had been opening his backpack to get out his tablet, closed it again. Never mind, he said. Do you have a TV? Asked Rue. Yes, it's in the living room. Come and see. The television was about the size of a washing machine and looked as if it was made of wood. Miss Filey pressed a button. For a while, nothing happened, and then the surprisingly small screen turned from dark grey to light grey, and there was a faint whining noise. I can't remember the last time I turned it on. My father used to enjoy watching history programmes, she said. While it's warming up, would you like to have a look at the garden? It wasn't until they had followed the flagstone path as far as the back wall that Rue risked a look at Ed. His expression made her snort with laughter. Glad you think it's funny, he said. That television should have police tape around it. I'm surprised it didn't explode when she switched it on. She's quite nice, though, isn't she? Said Rue, in a weird sort of way. They both looked back towards the house, as if Miss Filey might be listening, but there was nothing to see except the open French windows, and beyond them the faint glow of the television still warming up. Somewhere in another garden, a dog was woofing. Hi, said a voice behind them. Chapter 3. An extremely short kid of about Ed's age was looking at them over the low garden wall. He had a huge gap between his teeth and was cross-eyed. Hello, said Rue, trying to sound both friendly and sympathetic. What's your name? Elastico, said the boy. Sorry? Elastico. It can't be. Yes, it can, because that is my superpower. And as the boy spoke, he suddenly grew taller, but slightly jerkily, so it was obvious that he'd actually been on his knees behind the wall. He also uncrossed his eyes and took a small square of dark paper off his front teeth, revealing himself to be completely ordinary looking. Hi, I'm Willard, he said, grinning. Did I fool you? Slightly, said Ed, unwillingly impressed by the amount of effort that had gone into the introduction. Do you always do that when you meet new people? I've got a range of things, said Willard. Eye patch, fake sick, spider crawling up my face, that sort of thing. Why? Asked Rue. Just, you know, Willard shrugged. For a laugh. I'm class clown. What's your names? I'm Ed, and this is my sister Rue. It's Lucy, really, said Rue. How'd you get Rue from Lucy? I couldn't say her name properly when I was little, said Ed, and it just stuck. Though I do quite like being called Lucy, said Rue. Is that thing electric? Asked Willard, nodding at the wheelchair. No. Why are you in it? Hurt my leg, said Ed, briefly and untruthfully. We just moved here, said Willard, the day before yesterday, from Wales. You don't sound Welsh, said Ed. I'm not. Before that, we were in Northampton. We're always moving because my mother owns a circus. Really? Asked Rue, astonished. No, just kidding. She's a vicar. Oh. What does your mum do? Asked Willard. She's a driving instructor. So's our dad. And which school are you in? Meadows Primary, said Ed. That's where I'll be going too, after the holiday. Are you in year 5? Ed nodded. Me too, said Willard. I'm class clown, he said again, as if it were an official title. Ed felt a stir of irritation. Making people laugh was his own speciality, though he tended to do it with sarcasm rather than fake sick. Who's that? Asked Willard, looking past them. What's she holding? Ed and Rue turned to see Miss Filey coming through the French windows with a small gong in her hand. The television is on, she announced, hitting the gong with a drumstick. She's called Miss Filey, said Rue. We're spending the day with her. Can I too? Asked Willard, already slinging a leg over the wall. Said Rue, just as Willard lifted up the other leg and fell heavily into a shrub. He lay on the ground beneath it, eyes shut, mouth open, one hand twitching slightly. We ought to ask her first, said Ed. And shouldn't you check with someone at home? Willard opened his eyes. How did you know I wasn't badly injured? Lucky guess. Willard stood up. I'll just come in for 5 minutes. Hello, Miss Filey, he said, walking straight past her. I'm a friend of Ed and Rue's. Holy cow, he exclaimed, staggering back at the sight of the TV. It's old, said Ruth, stating the obvious. It's black and white, said Willard, gazing mesmerised at the screen, where two men in suits were standing in a studio. The top half of the picture was stationary, while the bottom half kept jerking round, as if the presenters were doing a Charleston. There's lemonade and biscuits, said Miss Filey, placing a tray on a spindly-looking table with a scratched top. I'll try and buy a packet of Wi-Fi for tomorrow. Do make yourself at home, everyone. Thanks very much, said Ruth. She watched Ed fiddling with the control buttons which stuck out of the set like biro tops, and then she realised that Miss Filey was lingering next to the door, her smile slightly fixed as if waiting for something. Thanks very much, she said again. Miss Filey ducked her head in an awkward nod and left the room. The television turned out only to have 2 channels, and both were covered in fizzy white dots, and the boys soon lost interest. For no particular reason, Willard put 4 biscuits in his mouth at the same time, started to choke, and then accidentally kicked over his lemonade while coughing. Ed threw a cushion onto the mess, and Rue looked for something to wipe it up with. There was a cabinet on one side of the room, and she searched through the drawers. There were beautiful tablecloths, as perfect as if they'd just been woven, and embroidered mats, fancy forks, a cake slice with a china handle, and a small tin box with a hinged lid, containing a bundle of little silver and white candles. In the bottom drawer, she found a packet of paper napkins, and she opened it and soaked up as much of the lemonade as possible. Where's Willard gone? She asked, suddenly realising that he wasn't in the room. Ed shrugged. He just ran off back into the garden. Maybe he's embarrassed about knocking the drink over. I tell you something, I'm not really looking forward to being in the same class as him. There'd be no room for his own witty comments, with Willard making armpit fart noises every 3 minutes. I'm back, said Willard, slightly out of breath, bursting in through the French windows with a plate in one hand. On it was 3/4 of an iced cake, decorated with fizzy fish. It was my birthday yesterday. Mum said we could finish this off. You haven't eaten much of it, said Ed. Well, it was only me and Mum. I don't know anyone here yet, do I? Oh. Ed felt a tweak of pity. A birthday with no friends sounded pretty miserable. OK, yeah, I'd love a slice. There's some birthday candles in the drawer, said Ruth, going back to the cabinet. We could just use one, couldn't we? It would make it more special. And here's some matches, she said, rummaging round and finding a box. Willard put the cake on the spindly-legged table, and Ruth stuck one of those white and silver candles in the icing. She was just about to light it when Willard puffed his cheeks as if about to vomit. Something stinks in here, he said. Ed glanced round. It's the cat. Ackley had stalked into the room, the fishy smell surrounding him like an invisible force field. Rue struck the match. I like cats, but I do wish that Miss Filey had the dog, she said, lighting the candle, because I really love... There was a crash, and Ackley shot across the room like a thrown fish sandwich, his tail a plume of terror. He ran straight up the wall and clung to a framed embroidery of a vase of flowers, hissing over his shoulder at an enormous dog that had charged in through the open French windows from the garden. It was covered in tight brown curls, and its mouth was open in a wide and toothy grin. Ed spun away. The dog's mouth was far too near his own face for comfort. It's a dog, shouted Willard, unnecessarily. Ackley was making a terrible sing-song yowling, and the dog was up on its hind legs, pawing at the wall just beneath him. Rue grabbed its collar and pulled, and the dog gave a joyful sort of bound in her direction, so that she stumbled back, knocking against the cake table. She let go of the collar and managed to grab the plate, but the cake itself was already in mid-air. It hit the wall and disintegrated in a blizzard of crumbs. A fizzy fish pinged off the television screen. Breathless, Rue turned round. The dog had gone. Golly Moses, what on earth is happening? Called Miss Filey, hurrying into the room. A neighbour's dog, said Ed, cautiously spinning back round. We heard it woofing earlier. It's gone out again now. It was huge. It must have jumped the garden wall. Sorry, said Rue, about the mess. It's Willard's cake. We'll clear it up. Oh, it's only crumbs. I'll go and fetch the dustpan and brush, said Miss Filey, struggling to detach Ackley's claws from the embroidered picture. I'll obviously have to be more careful about closing the doors. Are you all right? She asked Willard, who was still standing on the sofa. He nodded rather stiffly, but his eyes were as round as buttons, and when Miss Filey had taken the cat out of the room, he flapped his mouth a couple of times before he could speak. Did you see that? He asked. Couldn't exactly miss it, could we? Said Ed. I don't mean the dog appearing, I mean it disappearing. it was there, and then it wasn't there. It must have gone out through the French window, said Ed. No, said Willard. I was looking straight at it, and it was... He snapped a finger. Gone into thin air, like magic. Sure, said Ed, rolling his eyes at his sister. But Ruth said nothing at all.